So a major highlight of the project has been seeing, witnessing and sharing some of the research of the students and others who've been involved, seeing this unfold before our eyes. What we've seen is the rediscovery of objects and stories which have lain buried or been long forgotten in our archives. And as part of this, we've started to encounter what might be called the materiality of empire and colonialism. That is to say, the collections of objects and artifacts gathered and stored in the school archive in the 18 and 1900s, either for the purposes of display or teaching, or both. And as the global reach of the British Empire expanded, so did interest in this world beyond. And like in many other places, private and public galleries, libraries, museums, and of course in homes, grand or small, some schools became collecting spaces. Spaces where the outside world could be encountered, could be gazed upon, could be held even, and could be interpreted. And this is how the current collection we have, some of which is on display this evening, came to be. Sometimes gifts from former students or parents of students. Usually there is no indication of exactly how or why these objects were placed at the school, but we know many were on display as part of a permanent art gallery and natural history museum. The art gallery was housed for many years in the upper floor of the TRR and library. Together, as a collection, artifacts drawn from around the globe, from colonial and non-colonial settings, they presented a really powerfully skewed, pocket-sized view of the world and the empire within it. For students at the school, it may have opened their eyes to the world around them. They perhaps inspired curiosity. Perhaps they reinforced a sense of otherness. But doubtless, they were encouraged to locate the idea of empire in things and objects as much as in people and places. That's not to say that human stories did not play some important part. Stories of encounters with empire and colony were relayed to the school community in a number of ways, including by a roster of celebrity guest speakers, whose regular visits to the school are recorded in the school magazine, The Meteor. In the year 1900, for instance, the school hosted a talk by one Captain Alan Boisregon. Boisregon achieved fame by being one of two survivors of the so-called Benin massacre of January 1897. This was the event that sparked the now infamous punitive British raid on Benin, the destruction of Benin City in southern Nigeria, and the plundering by the British expeditionary forces of the Benin Bronzes. Captain Boisregon's talk, most likely given in his rooms, coincided with the establishment of the Southern Nigeria Protectorate in January 1900, when the British formally brought the region, including Benin City, under colonial control. This latest extension of empire was of national significance. It was celebrated in newspapers and parliamentary speeches, and it was perhaps this interest that explains the captain's visit to the school. It was also the context for a display put on in the school's art museum of items described as the Benin collection of bronzes and carvings. The collection, we have no further details on, remained on prominent display until October 1901, when it was reportedly relegated to the staircase. Perhaps Boisregon was responsible for presenting these items to the school. If that's the case, that might give us the provenance of the wooden Nigerian ceremonial mask on this table here, and it might give us the provenance for the carved Yoruba divination over there. Another guest at the school in the early 1900s was the adventurer and author Frank Thomas Bullen, and he was here to promote his novels about North Atlantic whaling. He visited twice, and in 1907 he was launching his latest book titled The Call of the Deep. His talk was illustrated with colourful slides, and according to the school magazine, it made a lasting impression. He may or may not have spoken about the complex and interconnected industries and workforces of the Maritimes, where on whaling vessels, sailors from Cape Verde worked alongside crew from First Nations peoples, Pacific Islanders, African Americans, and voyagers drawn from right across the North Atlantic seaboards. The profitable trade of whale oil supported a distinctive culture and community across remote, wildly strung out whaling stations. Again, through objects, our archive speaks now to a lost way of life and time. In this object here, it's an ornate whaler's powder hall. It's marked by skilled decorative work of a scrimshaw artist. So onto this object, what was once used to charge harpoon guns with gunpowder, the artist has traced in fine outline the silhouettes of sea creatures, some mythical, some real, details of flora and fauna and other magical items. We are transported, if you like, in this object to a frontier space, ocean's edges, to be with borderless seaboard peoples. Again, we don't know why the archive bought this object. Perhaps it was gifted by the author, Thomas Frank Bullen, or acquired by the school as a souvenir visit. Of course, schools mostly collect young people and life stories, not things. And as a school made famous by the mid-19th century, rugby was an obvious choice for many dozen sons, hundreds in fact, sons of empire. Children of colonial and army officers, of churchmen, of merchants and engineers sent to rugby from both remote outposts and from more familiar metropolitan centres from Cape Town, Mumbai, Kolkata, Shanghai, Penang, Melbourne, Nairobi, Cairo. Others arrived here, blown in by the winds of empire. In 1913, 4 Tibetan students embarked from India, bound for rugby school, as part of a scheme cooked up by the India office and the 13th Dalai Lama. The idea was to help both improve Tibetan-British relations and to modernise Tibetan administration and commerce. A British public school education was felt to be the best way to achieve this end. Rival powers in Central Asia, Russia and China, looked on with envy at this exercise of British soft power. And then is the story of the young Prince Alemehu of Abyssinia, caught up in British imperial conquests in and around Ethiopia. Prince Alemehu was brought to Britain and educated at rugby following the killing of his father, the Emperor of Abyssinia, in 1868. Known well at Queen Victoria's court, Alemehu's time at school is captured in 2 or 3 fleeting photographs and in a wonderful small watercolour painting over there, which is hard to see, but it's wonderful. Perhaps you'll just look at the end. It's a picture of him playing rugby on the close. His memorial plaque looks down on students in the school chapel, though it's hardly ever noticed really by us. And one of the highlights of the project this year was working with the biographer and journalist Andrew Heavens, whose new book, is on the stand behind me. His new book on Prince Alemehu introduced wider audiences to this story. Dying at the age of 19, too ill to continue his education after rugby at Sandhurst, Prince Alemehu's bones were interred in the side of the Royal Chapel of St George's, Windsor. Repeated calls by the Ethiopian government to return Alemehu's remains have been ignored by the British authorities. We will hear a poem from Shaq speaking to the plight of Alemehu and, again, draw your attention to that watercolour painting. There are many, many other stories that might be picked out. They all pose problems of interpretation and ongoing questions for us. Perhaps none more so than the career of William Hodson, the former head of house of Colton boarding house. Hodson was a bluff, frighteningly effective British soldier, whose varied contributions to world history includes the crushing of a revolt on the island of Guernsey, the invention of khaki uniform for the British Army, and the capturing and killing in cold blood of the princely heirs to the New York Emperor outside Delhi in 1857. A controversial figure in his own time, memorials for Hodson were erected in Lichfield Cathedral in Rugby School Chapel and in commemorative porcelain figurines, like this one here, produced for a mass market, infused by the violent beginnings of the British Raj. Hodgson spent some time in this room. He carved his name on the wall behind us. There is still a regiment named after Hodgson in the Indian Army, Hodgson's Horse. It's now an armoured regiment whose history includes battle honours in both world wars and in the India-Pakistan War of 1971 and in numerous border skirmishes since. It's actually one of the proudest regiments of the Indian Army today. That's despite its founding officer, William Hodgson, being responsible for violently ending the Mughal dynasty, India's most illustrious and ancient royal house. The princely swords that Hodgson accepted as token of Mughal surrender remain in the royal collection at Windsor Castle, where they've been since the early 1860s. And finally, while the work of the historians and archivists continues, we look to salvage and reimagine the snaking and snagging lines of shared imperial and colonial pasts. In spotlighting important finds, we engage with difficult contested histories, and we do seek to be better informed, hopefully more certain of the facts. But the project is also an important opportunity to forge something new. And perhaps the most exciting work is found in creative responses to the archive.